Under the chilling moonlight, where the ancient forests of the Choctaw whisper age-old secrets, this warrior tribe faced every enemy history could muster. But there is one story, a nightmare buried in darkness, that even the bravest dare not speak of. I am Cole, and today I will lead you into a terrifying chapter of the Choctaw, their war with an entity not of this world. The Choctaw were no strangers to blood and fire. They clashed with rival tribes, smoothed internal conflicts with sacred rituals, and even resisted the cold steel of European colonists. But in their memories, there exists an enemy beyond all human comprehension. It was not man, nor beast, an elder once told me, trembling, his eyes seeming to pierce through time, returning to that fateful night. Stories passed down through generations, like a cold wind weaving through the deep woods, carry the breath of courage and pain. But amidst the celebrated victories, a strange legend emerges, blurring the line between reality and myth. It tells of a tall creature, lurking in the shadows, with eyes glowing red like embers. That legend is more than just a fireside whisper. It's a scar on the Choctaw soul, a warning etched into their very bones. On moonless nights, when fog crept low across the ground, warriors often heard blood-curdling screams tearing through the silence. That was no wolf, nor man, an old hunter once told me, his hand gripping his axe as if the monster still lurked nearby. Unlike invaders bearing firearms and flags, this enemy had no clear form. It was a colossal shadow, taller than any warrior, with jet-black fur blending into the night. The Choctaw called it Shalombish, the ghost of the deep woods, but the modern world knows it by the name Bigfoot. I was skeptical, but after analyzing reports from American soldiers in World War II describing similar giant creatures in desolate forests, I had to ask, is this just a myth? One winter night in 1803, a group of Choctaw warriors patrolling near the Mississippi River suddenly caught a horrific stench, like corpses mixed with damp, rotting earth. It was as if the whole forest was decaying, a survivor later recounted, his voice distant with trauma. They heard the snap of branches, the heavy thud of footsteps approaching from afar, each step like a blow to the heart. I believe that stench wasn't just physical. It was a supernatural warning, awakening a primal fear in the human soul. Suddenly, from the darkness, a colossal figure emerged, over 10 feet tall, its blazing red eyes shining like two torches. The warriors drew their bows, but the arrows passed through it as if through mist. "Shoot! Shoot again!" the leader yelled, his voice breaking in panic. But the creature didn't fall. It let out a roar that shook the earth and vanished into the deep woods. I've studied UFO reports and noticed a common thread. These entities often seem to defy normal physical laws. Could Bigfoot be a creature from another dimension? After that night, the warriors returned with inexplicable wounds. Deep gouges on their chests, as if mauled by the claws of a giant beast. A curse began to spread. Anyone who looked into Shalombish's eyes would be haunted forever. I see it every night in my dreams, one warrior confessed to me, his voice trembling on the verge of tears. I've read about collective psychological phenomena in the military, but the Choctaw's fear wasn't imagined. It was too real, too vivid. The dense fog of that forest felt like a gateway to the unknown, a place where reality warped. I've analyzed Bigfoot reports from American soldiers in Vietnam, where they described a similar creature with a foul stench and red eyes. It looked at me, and I felt like my soul was being sucked out, one veteran recounted, his hand shaking as he pointed to a jungle photo. Is Bigfoot a trans-temporal entity, or just fear personified over centuries? Survivors of encounters consistently mention that stench, an unmistakable odor, like rotting flesh mixed with sulfur. Worse than a battlefield left untended for a week, a former Marine once compared, his eyes sunken from sleepless nights. The stench is often a sign they intentionally mark their presence to sow fear. But it wasn't just the smell. The accompanying sounds, low growls, snapping branches, indistinct whispers, made listeners feel like someone was lurking right behind them. It knew we were there, a Choctaw warrior once said, his voice dropping as if afraid of being overheard. I believe Bigfoot isn't merely a physical creature, but also possesses mind-manipulating abilities, driving victims into a state of panic before it strikes. Though time has passed, the story of Bigfoot still haunts the Choctaw, a reminder that some things in the deep woods cannot be subdued. I once heard a World War I veteran recount, "I'd rather face German firepower than encounter that thing again." Modern Bigfoot reports from the US and Canada reinforce my hypothesis. This creature isn't just legend, but a real entity lurking on the edge of reality and the supernatural. Before European ships brought ambition and guns ashore, the Choctaw had forged themselves in the crucible of war. They were phantoms of the deep woods, warriors who struck fear into their enemies. But I know, from ancient military records, that even the bravest felt a sense of unease when night fell, as if something out there, not of the human world, was watching. When white men set foot on American soil, bringing swords and false promises, the Choctaw did not flinch. They faced the new enemy, whether armored soldiers or sweet whispers of peace. "We do not fear men," an elder once told me, his gaze sharp. "But there are things in the woods no one dares to name." I've studied reports of supernatural phenomena in the military, and his words sparked an intuition. Their true enemies didn't always take human form. In the 17th century, as the British, Spanish, and French empires roared across America, the Choctaw chose to ally with the French. Not out of loyalty, but for survival. They needed protection from the brutal raids of the Chickasaw tribe, pawns of the British, who hunted people like animals. Too much blood had been spilled, a warrior once recounted, his voice low when speaking of nights under ambush. They didn't just fight, they played politics with the invaders. The flood of European settlers grew increasingly aggressive, swallowing ancestral lands like a ravenous beast. But the Choctaw didn't just draw their bows. They negotiated, reclaimed what they could, and even learned to trade with the enemy. I've read how they adopted new technologies, from muskets to building methods, as a means of survival. Yet, in the shadows, whispers of an ancient power persisted, as if the forest warned of a greater danger. More surprisingly, they opened their doors to missionaries, knowing each sermon was an invisible knife cutting into their culture. We let them in, but never forgot who we were, a Choctaw descendant once told me, his voice filled with pride. But could this openness have inadvertently awakened something dormant in the deep woods? When the American Revolutionary War erupted, the flames of conflict scorched Choctaw lands again. They were torn between factions. Some sided with the American rebels. Others leaned towards the Spanish and British. Choosing a side was choosing to live, a warrior once said bitterly, his hand tightening on his spear as if the past still haunted him. It was during these chaotic years that reports of giant creatures began to surface, as if the war had stirred entities best left untouched. The Choctaw never knew surrender. To them, retreat was digging their own graves. But a military report from that era describes a group of warriors returning from the forest, eyes wild with panic, mumbling about a tall shadow with a suffocating stench. It wasn't human, not animal, they whispered, as if merely mentioning it could summon its presence. Our horrifying story begins in 1855 in the land that would become Leflore County, Oklahoma. This was the heart of the new Choctaw Nation, but it wasn't their true homeland. "This land feels strange, like it doesn't welcome us," a hunter once told me, his voice trailing off as he gazed into the deep woods. I know that after so much suffering, the Choctaw were still trying to reconcile with this land. But the land, it seemed, was also watching them. Their ancestors had lived in the fertile forests of Alabama and Mississippi, hundreds of miles away. But unjust treaties, like knives to the heart, stole their homeland. The Treaty of Dokes Stand in 1820 was just the beginning. They promised peace, but only brought suffering, a Choctaw descendant once said, his eyes red-rimmed. I've studied military documents from this period, and I feel that pain, not just from loss, but from a sense of betrayal by the world itself. But nothing compares to the tragedy of the Trail of Tears from 1831-1833. 15,000 Choctaw were forced from their homes, trudging down frozen paths where death stalked every gust of wind. Every step was a curse, a survivor once recounted, her voice trembling as if she still heard the cries of her people. I've analyzed reports of supernatural phenomena during this time and found a chilling detail. Many reported seeing shadows lurking in the fog, as if the spirit of the land itself was watching. Around 2,500 perished on that journey, consumed by cold, disease, and starvation. The survivors carried not only grief, but also stories of things seen in the night. Tall figures, eyes glowing red like blood. They wouldn't leave us alone, one told me, his hands shaking as he pointed into the darkness. I believe the Trail of Tears wasn't just a forced migration. It was an unintentional ritual, awakening ancient, forgotten entities. By 1855, as the Choctaw re-established their nation in Indian Territory, they were still struggling to understand the new land. The forests here were dense and mysterious, filled with sounds unlike any they had known before. "Something is breathing with us," a warrior once whispered, his gaze lost in the distance. This land, Lafleur County, was an intersection of the real and the supernatural, where creatures like Shalambish still lurked. Beneath the ancient canopy of Lafleur County, where shadows seemed to breathe, the Choctaw didn't yet realize the forest hid a horrifying secret. I've studied military reports of unnamed creatures and felt a cold premonition. What stalked them wasn't wild beast nor human. It was an ancient entity, patiently waiting for its moment to emerge. In the years before the American Civil War, as the nation simmered with smoke and unease, the Choctaw in Lafleur County sought a fragile peace. They planted seeds, built homes, trying to forget the scars of the Trail of Tears. But I know, from old records, that this tranquility was merely a thin veil hiding a supernatural storm. Peace? Just an illusion, an elder once whispered, his eyes lost in the shadows as if seeing something no one else noticed. Though war had once been their breath, the Choctaw now focused on farming, building an agricultural community in this foreign land. They traded with nearby European settlements, exchanging furs and corn with strained smiles. "We learned to live alongside them," a Choctaw farmer once said, his voice a mix of pride and bitterness. But I noted a chilling detail. The Europeans often avoided the forest at night, as if they too sensed the presence of something unnatural. The mixing of worlds wasn't just about trade. Romances crossed racial lines, mixed blood children were born, carrying hopes of a harmonious future. But supernatural phenomena are often linked to places of cultural intersection, where the boundary between human and otherworldly becomes thin. When blood mixes, something awakens, an old military report once noted, sending a shiver down my spine. Lafleur County bears the name of a legendary family, the Lafleurs, with French and Choctaw blood flowing in their veins. Chief Greenwood Lafleur, a man with eyes sharp as knives, led the tribe through dark times. He never bowed his head, a descendant told me, voice full of pride. I know Greenwood secured this fertile land for the Choctaw, but what was the true cost of that land? Greenwood wasn't just a warrior. He was a bridge between two worlds, using diplomacy to shield the tribe from unjust treaties. But in the shadows, I discovered vague records of warnings from elders. This land doesn't belong to us. It belongs to something else. These words were ignored, but they make me suspect LaFleur wasn't just a settlement. It was a gateway to the unknown. Joshua LaFleur, a son of the clan, was the community's soul. Carrying mixed blood, he didn't reject his Choctaw heritage, but embraced it with burning passion. "I listen to the elders tell stories every night," Joshua once said, his warm smile hiding an indescribable unease. Those who stand between worlds often unintentionally become catalysts for the supernatural. Could Joshua sense the approaching shadow? Joshua wasn't beloved just for his lineage. He helped everyone, from Choctaw farmers to European drifters, with an open heart. "If there's trouble, find Joshua," people often said, their eyes lighting up at his name. Joshua often avoided hunting alone at night, as if he knew the forest wasn't safe, not because of wild animals, but something far more terrifying. In the mid-1850s, as tensions between the American North and South simmered like a volcano about to erupt, LaFleur County maintained a strange tranquility. Cornfields swayed in the wind, children's laughter echoed by the river. But I've read about such lulls in military history. They always signal a coming storm. "Everything's too quiet," a hunter once whispered to me, his hand tightening on his bow as if sensing an unseen danger. Then, on a moonless night in 1855, that tranquility shattered. A scream tore through the darkness, chilling as a blade scraping bone. People rushed from their lodges, hearts pounding, only to find livestock pens empty. "Who did this?" A farmer cried out, his voice breaking with anger and fear. I know that theft wasn't normal. No tracks, no noise. It was too perfect, as if carried out by something not of this world. Livestock, the community's lifeblood, vanished without a trace, leaving the Choctaw stunned. They searched the forest but found only unnerving silence and a strange stench, like rot mixed with sulfur. "Something is toying with us," a warrior whispered, eyes fixed on the darkness. Based on reports of Skinwalkers and Bigfoot, I sensed this theft wasn't random. It was a declaration of war from a supernatural entity. The LaFleur community didn't know that night was just the beginning. A terrifying siege was approaching, not from ordinary thieves, but from a group of mysterious predators lurking in the fog. "They are not human," an elder said, trembling, drawing a protective symbol on the ground. I sensed the terrifying truth. The Choctaw were now the prey of Shalambish, the ghost of the deep woods, the creature the world calls Bigfoot. Nights in LaFleur County were no longer for rest. The panicked cries of livestock tore through the darkness like a curse from the deep woods. The Choctaw rushed to their pens, hearts pounding, but saw only shadows swallowing everything. I've read about mysterious disappearances in the military, where not a single trace was left. Is this thing human, or an entity that knows how to manipulate darkness? More terrifying were the nights when no sound was heard. Dawn would break, and the people would find their pens empty in shock. No tracks, no bloodstains, as if the livestock had simply evaporated. "They leave nothing but fear," a farmer whispered to me, his eyes red from sleepless nights. I recognized the similarity to Skinwalker reports. Supernatural entities acting with cold precision, as if toying with their prey. "Like ghosts," an old man mumbled, his voice fading as he stared into the deep woods, where fog crawled like a living thing. I've heard these words and stories from American soldiers in Vietnam, describing elusive, traceless creatures. sensed the unease. This thing isn't just stealing livestock. It's sowing fear, step by step, like a dark ritual. Refusing to yield, the Choctaw organized mounted patrols, scouring the hills and valleys. "We will find them," a warrior vowed, his eyes sharp under the moonlight. With hunting skills honed over centuries, they believed no enemy could escape them. But I know, from military documents, that some entities don't follow human rules, and they were waiting, just out of sight. The Choctaw knew the land like their own breath. Every broken branch, every track told a story. But this time, the forest was eerily silent. "It knows how to hide," a hunter whispered, his hand trembling as he examined the ground. "This thing doesn't just evade, it manipulates the environment, like a hunter facing the masters themselves." Every clue led to a dead end, as if the forest conspired against them. The Choctaw, though proud, began to feel helpless. "How can it leave no trace?" a warrior yelled, his voice cracking with frustration. "I sense a similarity to UFO reports. Unexplained disappearances, as if the culprits came from another dimension." Gradually, a grudging respect grew among the Choctaw. This enemy was too cunning, too perfect. That respect was merely a veneer hiding fear. They didn't know this wasn't a game. It was preparation for a larger hunt. Then, one fateful night, the real nightmare began. The thieves no longer targeted livestock. They shifted their focus to people. The women, the soul of the community, dragged into the darkness. I heard her call my name. Then silence, a husband recounted, his eyes vacant as if his own soul had been drained. I recognized the terrifying shift. This thing doesn't just want property. It wants to break their spirit. The abductions occurred with chilling stealth. No screams, no signs of struggle, only emptiness left behind. They vanished as if they never existed. A mother sobbed, clutching her remaining child. I immediately researched disappearances linked to Bigfoot and saw a pattern. These entities don't kill immediately. They prolong the agony, as if feeding on despair. The horror escalated when children began disappearing. Night whispers turned into curses. I saw a shadow outside the window. Tall, not human, a surviving boy recounted, trembling, his voice lost in fear. This isn't robbery. This is a targeted hunt, orchestrated by something that knows exactly how to sow terror. LaFleur County was now a haunted village. Every snapped twig, every cold gust made people jump, hands gripping daggers. "We are no longer the hunters," a warrior said bitterly, his gaze lost in the distance. This psychology in military units stems from being ambushed by an unseen enemy. The community descended into panic. Village meetings were filled with tears and desperate prayers. "What have we done to anger it?" an elder asked, his voice trembling as he drew a protective symbol on the ground. I know the Choctaw were facing Shalambesh, the ghost of the deep woods, what the world calls Bigfoot. They weren't just losing loved ones. They were losing their grip on reality. The fear in LaFleur County ignited into a blaze of fury, burning in every Choctaw heart. They couldn't sit idle while darkness swallowed their loved ones. When fear peaks, humans fight back, not out of hope, but desperation. But did they know what they faced wasn't human? The Choctaw appealed for help from local authorities, then federal, but received only cold silence. They never cared, a woman whispered, voice trembling as she held her remaining child. This indifference wasn't just unjust, it pushed them into the vortex of something more terrifying. As so often in their painful history, the Choctaw realized they could rely only on themselves. In the meeting lodge, Smoke from the fire mingled with the tense air. "What do we do?" a man shouted, his voice breaking with anger. I sensed the parallel with isolated military units. When there's no one left to help, they're forced to confront the darkness, whatever it may be. "Hope?" an old warrior roared, his face deeply etched with the scars of time. "Hope stole my child. We need action." The crowd stirred, whispers spreading like a cold wind. They thought the enemy was human, but the signs, no tracks, no sound, hinted at something beyond imagination. "We must fight," a young voice cut through, strong as thunder. Joshua LaFleur stood up, his eyes blazing like torches. "Every warrior, every able-bodied man will ride with me." The crowd fell silent, swept up in his fervor. Joshua was the soul of this fight, but I wonder, was that courage enough to face an entity not of this world? "We don't return until our families are safe." Joshua swore, his fist clenched as if to crush the darkness itself. The people cheered, but in their hearts, fear still smoldered. Joshua was leading them on a hunt, but they might have been the prey. Though believing the enemy human, the Choctaw disregarded civilized laws. Their justice would be meted out with blood, with cold steel under the moon. "If the law won't protect us, we make our own law," a warrior cried out. The parallel with wartime militias. They weren't seeking justice. They were seeking survival, whatever the cost. Leading the war party were Joshua LaFleur and the Tubby clan, legendary Choctaw warriors. Hamas Tubby and his 6 sons, tall as mountains, rode like the wind. "They are the enemy's nightmare," a villager whispered, eyes full of hope. "Even giants can fall before something formless." With 40 brave warriors, Joshua's party rode into the deep woods, carrying the prayers of those left behind. "Bring my child home, Joshua," a mother sobbed, clutching his shirt. I feel the weight of this moment. They weren't just fighting for family. They were fighting to restore faith that the world still made sense. Day after day, the war party traversed wild forests, facing storms and scorching heat. "We don't stop," Joshua yelled, his voice cutting through the howling wind. No one dared turn back, though sometimes they felt the forest breathing, watching. This forest isn't neutral. It's the enemy's ally. They followed the smallest clues. A broken branch, an odd patch of earth. But the enemy was always one step ahead. "It knows we're coming," a warrior whispered, gaze lost in the shadows. This thing wasn't just hiding, it was leading them, like an animal luring prey into a trap. After many relentless days, the war party was no closer to its goal. Each step felt heavier with unease. "What are we hunting, Joshua?" a young man asked, his voice trembling as he peered into the thick fog. The Choctaw were no longer the hunters. They were being hunted by Shalambish, the ghost of the deep woods, the creature the world calls Bigfoot. After days of relentless pursuit, the younger warriors' spirits began to waver. Fatigue etched their faces, their eyes dimming with disappointment. "We're chasing ghosts," one mumbled, his voice lost to the wind. "I've studied the psychology of military units on impossible missions, and I know. When hope fades, fear fills the void. And here, that fear wasn't just human." But Joshua LaFleur didn't falter. A fierce intuition burned within him, like a guiding flame in the darkness. "They're still out there somewhere," he whispered, his sharp eyes fixed on the horizon. I sensed something different in Joshua's voice. Not just determination, but a supernatural intuition, as if he saw something beyond ordinary sight. "Perhaps they smelled us and fled," Hamas Tubby mused, his voice heavy as stone as he gazed into the deep woods. "No," Joshua replied, his tone firm as steel. "They're waiting, Hamas. Arrogant or foolish, they won't leave." Joshua was right. But did he realize they were the prey? "Let that arrogance bury them," Hamas growled, a cold smile touching his lips. But then he looked at Joshua, a flicker of concern in his eyes. "What do you see, Joshua? Tell me." Joshua remained silent, gripping his spyglass, but his eyes burned as if he had glimpsed a horrifying truth. Had he seen the glowing red eyes in the dark, or just the shadow of fate? Without explanation, Joshua spurred his horse forward, swift as wind sweeping the plains. The war party instantly followed, hearts pounding at the prospect of confronting the enemy. Finally, "It's time!" a warrior shouted, his voice a mix of excitement and fear. They halted before a pitch-black forest, where light seemed to be swallowed whole. A cold unease slithered through each warrior, as if the woods exhaled a warning. "Something's wrong," a young man whispered, hand trembling on the reins. This forest wasn't just shelter, it was the domain of something not of this world. A horrific stench washed over them, so potent it overpowered the fresh scent of the woods. The warriors recoiled, some coughing, eyes stinging. "The smell of death," Hamas whispered, his voice fading as realization dawned. "This smell isn't just rot. It's the mark of a supernatural entity, like Shalambish, claiming its territory." But stranger still was the reaction of the horses. Animals that had faced gunfire now trembled, whinnying in panic, refusing to enter the forest. "Easy now," a warrior yelled, but it was useless. Only the horses of Joshua and the Tubbies stood firm, as if held by their riders' iron will. Animals sense what humans cannot, and here they were screaming at an unseen danger. Joshua, Hamas, and the 6 Tubby sons dismounted, entering the woods weapon ready. Each step felt leaden, survival instincts screaming to turn back. "We can't stop now," Joshua whispered, his voice steady but his eyes flickering. They weren't just entering a forest, but a dimension where reality warped. Daylight dwindled under the dense canopy, darkness enveloping them like a curse. The forest was eerily silent. No birdsong, no rustling leaves, only the thumping of their own hearts. "It's like the whole world is holding its breath," a Tubby son mumbled, his voice trailing off. "I recognize this pattern from UFO reports. This silence isn't natural. It's the sign of an entity manipulating the environment, preparing to strike." The stench grew stronger, like an invisible wall crushing their chests. They reached a clearing where faint moonlight filtered down, and their hearts stopped at the horrific sight. "No, it can't be," Joshua whispered, his voice breaking. "I know this moment would change them forever." They had found the truth, but the price was an indelible nightmare. Before them lay dozens of bodies, the abducted wives and children, now just shattered remnants of life. Flesh torn, bones exposed under the moonlight as if ravaged by a frenzied pack of beasts. Corpses piled high, flies buzzing like a macabre symphony. Who did this?" Hamas roared, but his voice died as he saw the massive piles of dung scattered around. Not from any known animal, but from Shalambish, the forest ghost the world calls Bigfoot. This wasn't a battlefield. It was a brutal ritual devoid of mercy. In the dim moonlight, as the Choctaw warriors stood paralyzed before the carnage, heavy footsteps echoed from the edge of the woods like the heartbeat of darkness itself. "They're coming," a Tubby son whispered, his voice lost in horror. This moment wasn't accidental. They had been lured here, into the very heart of the nightmare. Joshua LaFleur snapped to attention, his sharp eyes scanning the darkness. They weren't running. he growled, gripping his reins. I sensed the dreadful truth. These beings weren't cowardly fugitives. They were herding their prey into a trap, and the warriors had walked right into their domain unaware. From the thick fog, colossal figures emerged, moonlight sketching their forms like a living nightmare. Not human, not animal. They were something beyond imagination. Mother Earth. Save us, a young warrior mumbled, hand trembling on his bow. This was Shalambish, the ghost of the deep woods, what the world calls Bigfoot, revealed in its full terror. They stood taller than any man, powerfully built, covered in black fur matted with blood and grime. Thick lips parted to reveal sharp yellowed fangs like deadly knives. But most terrifying were the eyes, jet black, vacant, like two pits swallowing the soul. I've read similar descriptions in military reports from World War I. Those eyes didn't just see, they invaded, planting primal fear directly into the human mind. The creatures beat their chests, low guttural roars echoing like a prehistoric challenge. The warriors stood frozen, hearts pounding before this raw power. They want us to run, Hamas Tubby whispered, his voice tense but steady. I realized, this isn't just a hunt, it's a ritual, where they assert dominance through blood. Joshua was the first to break the paralysis. For our people, he yelled, drawing his gleaming sword and spurring his horse straight at the nearest beast. The blade swung, steel flashing in the moonlight. The courage of warriors facing the supernatural is powerful, and I note, Joshua wasn't fighting for survival. He was fighting for honor. But honor can lead one into deadly peril. The beast stood still, its black eyes glinting with cold calculation. As Joshua's horse charged, it swung an arm. A single blow crushed the horse's skull, spraying blood. Joshua fell but immediately sprang up, eyes blazing. I sensed the desperation. Joshua didn't know he faced something steel couldn't kill. But that courage is what makes him immortal in legend. Joshua drew his pistol, firing repeatedly, bullets sinking into the beast's body. Black blood oozed, but it only staggered, growling as if in mockery. Die, Joshua screamed, charging with his sword, landing deadly blows. I've analyzed Bigfoot reports. These creatures defy physics. They seem to absorb pain like pleasure, and Joshua was paying the price for that truth. But the battle wasn't against a single foe. Two other beasts glided forward, swift as shadows. One slipped behind Joshua, huge hands seizing his head. No, Hamas yelled, but it was too late. With a brutal twist, Joshua's neck snapped, his body collapsing like a broken puppet. Joshua's death wasn't just a loss. It was Shalambish's declaration that none could defy them. The three beasts raised Joshua's head high, blood dripping in the moonlight, and let out a reverberating howl that shook the forest. That howl wasn't just victory. It was a warning to any who dared enter their domain. This was their final ritual, turning the enemy into a symbol of helplessness before primal power. But the Choctaw did not break. Horror transformed into frenzied rage. For Joshua, Hamas roared, raising his heavy rifle, a buffalo rifle capable of tearing through an elephant. The remaining warriors followed suit, their eyes burning like hellfire. They were no longer afraid. They had crossed a human threshold, becoming vengeance incarnate. Gunfire erupted, gunpowder smoke mingling with the stench of blood and rot. The beasts roared, showing pain for the first time, but they didn't retreat. Keep firing, a tubby son screamed, his voice cracking with frenzy. They were fighting Shalambish, but were bullets enough to fell something that existed before mankind? Or were they just prolonging the nightmare? Under a hail of bullets from the .50 caliber rifles, the three giant beasts roared in agony, their bodies shuddering like ancient trees in a hurricane. The shriek of metal cutting air mingled with their screams, echoing through the haunted woods. Even supernatural entities couldn't withstand concentrated firepower, but the cost of this victory would haunt them forever. As the thick gunpowder smoke cleared, only one beast remained alive, dragging its mangled body across the ground, leaving a trail of black blood thick as tar. "It's still trying to run," Hamas Tubby whispered, his eyes cold as blades. "This creature isn't just an animal. It has an iron will, as if driven by something beyond instinct." Robert Tubby, Hamas's 18-year-old son, approached the beast, his face devoid of emotion. The dagger in his hand gleamed in the moonlight, his eyes like ice. "You will pay," he whispered, his voice chillingly low. After what they had witnessed, the carnage, the blood, the grief, mercy had died in their hearts, leaving only rage. A single swift knife thrust finished the beast, black blood spraying out, mingling with the forest's rot. The warrior stood silent, breathing heavily, surveying the scene of slaughter. They were survivors, but this victory brought no joy. This wasn't man triumphing over beast. It was a confrontation with darkness, and darkness always leaves its mark. No one cheered. No one smiled. The warriors quietly gathered the remains of their comrades and loved ones, their hearts heavy as lead. "What did we do wrong?" one whispered, voice lost as he looked at the corpses. They had won the battle, but the cost was their faith in the world. News of Joshua LaFleur's death and the horrific truth about the abducted spread back to LaFleur County like a cold wind. They didn't make it. None survived, Hamas reported, his voice shattering like glass. The people wailed, clinging to each other in despair, fragile hope dissolving like mist. This grief wasn't just loss. It was a permanent scar on the community's soul. The returning warriors were no longer themselves. Every night, trying to sleep, they saw again the monster's black eyes, like pits boring into their souls. "They're still there in the dark," Robert Tubby whispered, his hand trembling as he clutched his knife. These images weren't just memories. They were a curse, rooted deep in their minds. On some nights, when wind howled through the LaFleur hills, people would startle awake, thinking they heard terrifying howls echoing from the deep woods. "They haven't left," an elder said, trembling, drawing a protective symbol on the ground. "That howl isn't just sound. It's a reminder that Shalambish still lurks, waiting for its time to return." The story of the Choctaw battle with Shalambish, or Sasquatch as the world calls it, is a strange ink blot in the annals of supernatural lore. Few tales recount an actual war between humans and these creatures. Could this be evidence that they were once organized, hunting humans like an army? But the truth of 1855 in LaFleur County remains a mystery. Did the Choctaw truly face a violent Sasquatch colony? Or is this just a legend born from the fear and shadows of the wild frontier? I'm not sure, but the scars on their souls are real, and that's stronger evidence than any document. The survivors never recounted the full story. They only whispered of shadows in the woods, of the smell of blood and screams not of this world. "Don't go into the forest when the moon is dim," an old warrior warned, his gaze lost in the distance. They didn't just fear Shalambish. They feared the truth would destroy what remained of their community. Whether fact or legend, this story lives on among the Choctaw, a warning etched into their bones. I stand before the LaFleur woods, feeling the chill from the shadows, and wonder, if Shalambish is still out there, hidden in the mist, are they waiting for another war? Some mysteries don't need answers. They just need to be respected. The story of the bloody battle in LaFleur County in 1855, seems woven between reality and myth, like a tapestry faded by time. Could the truth be hidden in the gaps of history where no pen dared to record it? Leflore County in 1855 was the heart of the Choctaw Nation in Oklahoma, an undeniable fact etched in the chronicles. This land still carries the breath of those who bled to protect it. I've been here, felt the weight in the air, as if the forest still whispers untold secrets. The Leflore clan were prominent names, from Chief Greenwood to Joshua. Their renown is recorded in history books. Hamas Tubby and his sons were also not fictional. They were real warriors, strong as the Oklahoma mountains. But why are these real people attached to such a strange legend? However, history becomes hazy regarding Joshua's death. No documents record him falling in battle, let alone at the hands of a mythical creature. If Joshua truly died as the story tells, it would be an event that changed Choctaw history. But why did no one record it? Many believe Leflore County was named to honor the family's influence, especially Greenwood, who secured the land after the Trail of Tears. A name to remember achievement, not death, a historian once told me firmly. But I can't help suspecting. Did history deliberately conceal a truth too horrifying to acknowledge? Bigfoot, or Shalombish, as the Choctaw call it, rarely appears in mainstream history books. When was the last time you saw a supernatural creature in an academic text? Even today, many scoff at the idea of Sasquatch, dismissing it as imagination or misidentification. But I know, skepticism cannot erase what Native people have witnessed. What's strange is the lack of documentation from 1855. No diaries, letters, or newspaper articles mention a horrific tragedy in Leflore. If a war with Bigfoot really happened, why did no one dare write about it? Or were they afraid the telling would awaken something in the deep woods? Despite the lack of proof, this story persists in folklore, like an unquenchable flame. It's not just legend, a Choctaw elder once told me, his eyes lost in the shadows. It's a warning, passed down through generations to protect us. I feel the weight of those words. A story that lives so long cannot be mere fantasy. Bigfoot isn't exclusive to the Choctaw. From tribes in the Northwest to the plains, stories of forest people appear across North America. They are tall, hairy, and fast as ghosts. A Navajo hunter once recounted, his voice low as he stared into the campfire. The similarities in these descriptions can't be coincidence. They hint at an ancient truth, veiled by time. But Bigfoot isn't always the same. For some tribes, it's a curious phantom, sneaking food or teasing children. It doesn't harm anyone, just likes to watch us live. A Cherokee person once told me with a laugh. But I know. The lighthearted stories are just a veneer. Beneath lie whispers of a violent Bigfoot, one that hunts humans like prey. In darker territories, Bigfoot is a nightmare. They don't just steal, they kill, a Sioux warrior once said, his hand tightening on his spear as he told of an ancient conflict. I've read native legends describing Bigfoot as predators, even organizing in groups to confront humans. If true, Leflore 1855 wasn't unique, just perhaps the most clearly recounted instance. Finally, I stand before the Leflore woods where the story began. History may be silent, but the land is not, I whisper, feeling the chill from the fog. Did the Choctaw truly fight Shalombish, or was this their way of explaining unspeakable trauma? I don't have the answer. But when the wind howls through the trees, I can't help but wonder. Are they still out there, waiting? In the darkest native stories, Bigfoot aren't just solitary phantoms. They live in groups, like families or even violent colonies, dominating the deep woods with primal strength. I once heard an elder whisper, They don't just hunt, they protect territory, like we protect family. I note, if Shallumbish truly organized like this, LaFleur, 1855, could have been the battleground of an unrecorded war. Another name echoes in legend. Shampe, a giant hairy creature whose rotting stench makes anyone shudder. It's not just an animal, a Choctaw hunter once told me, his eyes lost in the campfire. It's the forest's rage, hunting men the way we hunt deer. Shampe or Shallumbish, the name doesn't matter. The fear they inspire is real. Shampe is described as a living nightmare, tall, its body covered in matted fur, blood and mud, with breath reeking of death. Legends say it eats human flesh, attacking anyone who dares enter its territory. No one dares hunt alone when the moon is dim, a Choctaw mother once warned. This hostility isn't random. It's like a curse, binding humans to primal fear. With such a rich trove of mythology, could the Choctaw have truly battled a Shallumbish colony? History may be silent, but stories surviving centuries aren't accidental. They are the memory of a buried truth. Countless native experiences have dissolved in the stream of time, unrecorded, erased by the encroachment of the outside world. We used to tell everything by the fire, a Choctaw descendant told me, his voice sad. But those who came later didn't want to listen. I know. What remains, like this story, must be too terrifying to be forgotten. Even history books only record major wars, ignoring smaller, bloody skirmishes on remote frontiers. A war with Bigfoot? No one dared write about it because it defies all reason. But history's silence doesn't mean the event never happened. If Bigfoot were mere fiction, this story would be easily dismissed. But I've read hundreds of reports from around the world, from America to the Himalayas, of tall, hairy creatures with eyes like black pits. I saw it in the jungle. An American soldier in Vietnam once recounted, his voice shaking. It wasn't an animal. It knew I was there. These accounts are too similar to be mere coincidence. Bigfoot encounters aren't rare, from fleeting glimpses to violent confrontations. It threw rocks at our tent, a modern hunter told me, his eyes still wide with panic. If Bigfoot exists, LaFleur 1855 wasn't unique, just perhaps the most chillingly detailed account, like a scar on collective memory. This legend endures, blending with contemporary Sasquatch stories, a reminder that darkness always holds secrets. I don't believe in Bigfoot, a colleague once laughed at me. But I replied, try standing alone in the LaFleur woods at midnight, then tell me that again. The story's very existence is proof, not necessarily of Bigfoot, but of humanity's undying fear. Could something be watching, waiting, in the vast forests of the heartland? I once heard a hunter say, when the wind stops, I feel it, right behind me. Is the Choctaw fear an echo of a real war, buried by modern science under layers of skepticism? Whether real or myth, the story of Shallumbish still haunts LaFleur County. Don't go in the woods when the fog is thick, a Choctaw child once told me, eyes wide with fear. Children don't lie about fear. They sense what adults have learned to ignore. History may not record it, but the land never forgets. Did the Choctaw fight a Bigfoot colony, or was this their way of explaining wordless trauma? I don't know, I admit. But when I hear the wind howl through the woods, I can't help but shiver, as if Shallumbish is still out there, waiting. As pale moonlight covers the LaFleur woods, the story of Shallumbish, the Choctaw Bigfoot, doesn't end in 1855. It lives on, weaving through fireside whispers like an unfading secret. Does this legend still echo within the Choctaw community today? In my search for truth, I discovered a valuable lead. Tim Tingle, a Choctaw author who has dedicated his life to retelling his people's stories. Tingle doesn't just write books, he keeps the Choctaw spirit alive. I felt a surge of excitement tracking Shalambish's trail. Tingle has a children's book titled Choctaw Bigfoot, Midnight in the Mountains, featuring a creature called Nalusa Cheeto, the Big Hairy Man. It attacks a family in the Kiamichi Mountains. The Kiamichis are right in the heart of the Choctaw Nation, too close to Lafleur County to be mere coincidence. Nalusa Cheeto is described as a giant, hairy shadow with glowing red eyes and terrifying strength. In the book, it chases a family through the deep woods, spreading fear. Just like Shalambish, could Tingle have heard the 1855 story from elders and adapted it into a modern version? I tried contacting people from the Choctaw Nation, hoping to find someone who could confirm. Is the legend of the Bigfoot War still told? We need a voice from the community. But those efforts yielded no results, as if the story remains hidden behind a veil of mist. Oral tradition is a treasure trove, but also a labyrinth. No diaries, no letters exist from 1855 to prove the battle. But lack of proof doesn't mean it didn't happen. I recall an elder's words. What we tell isn't for records. It's for survival. Though hard to verify, the Shalambish story continues to haunt me. It's too detailed, too vivid to be mere imagination. I've heard modern hunters talk about shadows in the woods, about blood-curdling screams. If they see Nalusa Cheeto today, why not in 1855? I travel to stand before the Kiamichi Mountains, where Tingle set his story. Wind whistles through the trees, carrying a chilling cold. If Shalambish ever existed, it might still be here. Not in books, but in the land, in the memory of the Choctaw. Whether legend or truth, this story is deeply etched into Choctaw culture, an unfading warning. Don't go in the woods when the fog is thick, a child once told me, voice trembling. Children sense what adults have forgotten, that the darkness always has eyes, always listens. My efforts to find concrete proof may not have succeeded yet, but I won't give up. Every story is a piece of the puzzle. Nalusa Cheeto, Shalambish. They both point back to the same ancient fear, a mystery we've only scratched the surface of. History may be silent, but people are not. The Choctaw have kept this story alive through generations because it matters, not just to them, but to all of us. One day, we might find the final piece. Shalambish isn't just Bigfoot, it's an embodiment of what we fear and revere. Whether real or not, it reminds us that the deep woods always keep secrets, and sometimes we shouldn't seek answers. Just listen.
Have you ever wondered if skinwalkers are real or not? I was also curious and went online to search and found stories about skinwalkers, and I believe they are real. First, let's start with the origin of the skinwalker. On October 15, 1752, Canyon de Chelly, Navajo Territory, now Arizona. On the darkest waning moon night of that autumn, the usually peaceful land of the Navajo in Canyon de Chelly was suddenly engulfed in ghostly howling winds. In the small village at the foot of the mountain, a man named Hastani, once a renowned medicine man in the tribe, had fallen into the abyss of darkness. Hastani's wife and daughter had died mysteriously just days before. Their strange deaths were unexplained, and Hastani believed the spirits had abandoned him. Angry and desperate, he decided to perform a forbidden ritual to take revenge on those who had taken his dearest loved ones. Under the flickering candlelight in a dark cave, Hastani donned the skin of a black wolf, an absolute taboo in Navajo culture. His hand trembled as he drew horrifying images on the ground with human blood, mixed with bone ash from a recently robbed grave. As the ritual reached its climax, Hastani felt his body tremble violently, his flesh feeling like it was melting. A hoarse voice echoed in his mind. "From now on, you are no longer human. You will hunt the living, walk on the four legs of beasts." Immediately, his body deformed painfully. His flesh turned into a coat of jet-black fur. Long, sharp fangs grew from his blood-soaked teeth. His eyes glowed an eerie red. The first skinwalker in Navajo history was born. From that night on, the villagers began to witness horrifying events. Livestock brutally torn apart, a dark figure with human-like laughter echoing in the dead of night, and especially a series of unexplained deaths. The Navajo panicked. No one dared to step outside after sunset. The peak of terror occurred on the night of October 22nd, 1752. A group of hunters decided to track the mysterious creature. They followed strange, giant footprints to the edge of a deep chasm. Suddenly, from the darkness, a giant wolf standing upright on two legs appeared with glowing red eyes, emitting a chilling sound. "You wanted to see me?" Before they could react, they all found themselves paralyzed, as if trapped in their deepest nightmare. The monster took slow steps towards them, each claw dragging across the cold stone ground. It leaned close to the lead hunter's face, its piercing red eyes staring straight into his soul. A familiar voice spoke mockingly. "I was once Hastani. Now I am your eternal nightmare." After that night, no one ever saw those hunters again. The Navajo passed down stories of the monster who had lost its humanity, forced to hunt humans to sustain its existence. Hastani became a haunting legend in the land of Canyon de Chelly for centuries thereafter. Today, when night falls on Navajo land, people still say that if you happen to catch sight of glowing red eyes in the mountains, absolutely never look directly at them. Because that is the first skinwalker, still wandering, searching for unfortunate souls for its next ritual. November 15th, 1985. The Western Training Forest area of the Quantico Military Base, Virginia. Jason Miller, a 28-year-old military policeman, was conducting a night patrol in the base's isolated forest area. He was of Navajo descent and had heard many mysterious legends from his grandfather since childhood, especially about skinwalkers, creatures capable of shape-shifting, spreading terror in the darkness. Around 11 p.m., Jason stopped his patrol vehicle on a dirt road near the edge of the forest to check wildlife surveillance cameras he had set up the previous week. He walked about 1 mile deep into the forest, the thick darkness surrounding him, only the sound of his footsteps on dry leaves echoing steadily. Jason quickly climbed up to where the camera was placed on the large oak tree. While checking the images from the camera, he suddenly heard a strange noise. Footsteps approaching from a distance. Jason quickly turned off his flashlight, his heart pounding as he saw a dim black figure in the faint moonlight. "Anyone there?" Jason called out loudly, hoping it was a lost officer. The black figure stopped, then suddenly stood upright on two legs, clearly revealing the form of a tall deer, but its stance was bizarre, its head tilted slightly as if looking directly at Jason. In the deadly silence, the creature suddenly slammed its head hard against the tree trunk, repeatedly, until its head shattered, blood splattering on the wood. Jason trembled. Before he could recover, the strange creature suddenly lifted its head, directing its empty eyes towards him. From its mouth, a clear voice rang out, cold and threatening.
"I know you're there."
Jason panicked, fell from his spot, hastily abandoned all his equipment, and rushed towards his patrol vehicle. He sped back to the base, his hands and feet trembling violently, his pale face unable to hide his terror. A month later, Jason finally gathered enough courage to return with colleagues to retrieve the abandoned gear. The large oak tree still bore dried bloodstains, bone fragments scattered at its base, clear evidence of the horrifying experience Jason had endured. Since then, Jason always hears whispers in the dark night, as if the creature had followed him home. And every time he hears it, Jason recognizes the terrifying voice that still haunts his mind. I know you're there. August 10th, 2021. The forested mountain area near Greenville, California. The Dixie Fire was raging fiercely, becoming one of the largest disasters in California state history. The National Guard was mobilized to assist with rescue, civilian evacuation, and security around the fire zone. That night, a patrol team of 6 guardsmen was assigned to control a secondary road near the forest edge to prevent civilians from entering the dangerous area. Around 10:30 p.m., while the team was taking a short break, suddenly a painful scream, clearly a woman's, echoed from deep within the forest, shattering the silence. The entire team immediately went on high alert. Sergeant Brian Johnson moved forward, firmly gripping his rifle, shouting towards the forest, "Is anyone there? Need help?" A deadly silence fell, before Brian's own voice echoed back from the woods, clear and exact, word for word. "Is anyone there? Need help?" A chill ran down the spines of the entire team. Before anyone could comprehend what was happening, a tall, dark figure emerged from the bushes, standing upright on 2 legs. Under the dim moonlight, the soldiers froze, recognizing the figure as resembling both a human and a deer, its eyes glowing red like 2 embers. The strange creature turned its head to look directly at the soldiers, slowly breaking into a twisted, evil grin. No one dared to move, fear seemingly suffocating each person's breath. Suddenly, the creature let out a piercing shriek, full of fury, then vanished into the dark forest as quick as lightning. Terrified, the team retreated to the main rendezvous point, reporting the incident to their superiors. Although reassured that it might have just been wildlife, they all knew they had encountered something not of this world. 3 months later, the wildfire was fully contained. However, every night, Brian had nightmares, always featuring the glowing red eyes and the twisted, malicious grin. He knew well that creature had not left him. It was still hiding somewhere in the darkness, always watching Brian's every step, waiting for a chance to return. And in every dream, Brian's own voice always echoed clearly from the darkness. "Is anyone there? Need help?" November 12th, 1985, Arizona Camp Navajo Military Baseo. This place lies amidst the desolate Arizona desert, remote, quiet, and full of mystery. Camp Navajo Military Base is famous for strange stories that no one dares to speak of, except those who have witnessed them firsthand. And that day, a story unfolded that soldiers who were once here can never forget. Bob, a young soldier newly enlisted in the army, was assigned patrol duty around the base's border on a cold night. He only had a few months of experience in the military, but his courage and determination had helped him overcome initial challenges. However, that night, he didn't expect to face a horror more terrifying than any battle. Darkness fell quickly, leaving only the faint, flickering silhouettes of light poles against the desert sand. Bob and his teammate were tasked with patrolling along the base fence. Everything was peaceful until an unusual figure appeared in the dim light. A man wearing deerskin with long white hair stood there as if waiting for someone. It was a strange and frightening sight, as the soldiers had never seen anyone outside the military present in this area late at night. He and his teammate approached, ordering the man to move away from the restricted zone. However, there was no response. Bob felt a chill run down his spine as he realized this man was not ordinary. He quickly drew his gun and just as he turned back to look at his teammate, the man vanished. Before he could understand what happened, a large, strange rabbit appeared right where the man had been. The rabbit stared directly at Bob, then ran off, disappearing into the darkness. More horrifyingly, when Bob looked back, the man had reappeared, but this time outside the base fence, an area impossible to cross. Unable to explain what had happened, Bob and his teammate immediately left the area and dared not report it. However, that wasn't the end. The next day, as the base was shrouded in fog, strange events became increasingly frequent. Another soldier named Tom reported hearing a strange call from the border area, the voice sounding exactly like their commander's. However, when he responded, he only received silence. Approaching the fence, Tom couldn't believe his eyes. The large rabbit appeared again, this time with glowing yellow eyes, exactly like the man's eyes from the previous day. Suddenly, the rabbit lifted its head, stood upright like a person, and stared at them with eyes holding something mysterious. Before they could understand, the rabbit abruptly vanished into the darkness. Strangely, right after that, in the darkness, the whisper of a human voice echoed, as if manipulating their minds. "I know you're there." Bob and Tom fled in panic, but couldn't escape the feeling they were being watched. Strange sounds echoed in their minds throughout that night, and every time they looked back, they saw a dim figure waiting for them from afar. From that day on, Bob never returned to Camp Navajo. He couldn't face what he had witnessed. Every night, he woke up haunted, hearing the whispers, the cold laughter echoing as if the Skinwalker was still watching him from the darkness. December 15th, 1985, 1 month after the strange event, a military search party discovered Tom's corpse in the base's border area. His body was savagely torn and clawed, as if some creature had dragged him into the darkness. Notably, there was a large bite mark on Tom's neck, like that of a beast, and his eyes had turned yellow. On July 12, 1998, in a remote forest in the western United States, a grandfather and grandson, John and Billy, were hunting together. This forest was rarely visited, a wild place isolated from the outside world. Both grandfather and grandson were accustomed to nature and often went hunting. But today, they would face an inexplicable, strange event, one that would later cause them to live in fear forever. While moving through a sparse forest area, they suddenly saw a deer moving ahead. However, the strange thing was that this deer did not act like the normal deer they had seen before. Instead of running away, the deer began bashing its head violently against a rock, each blow fracturing its skull, blood and brain matter starting to ooze from its head. But strangely, instead of stopping or moving away, the deer continued to lick its own blood and brain matter off the rock, as if there was no life left in its body. This sight horrified the grandfather and grandson. They couldn't comprehend why the deer was acting this way. But what was even stranger and more terrifying was when the deer had bashed its head until it was nearly unrecognizable, it suddenly stood upright like a human, its soulless eyes staring intently at the two of them. It felt like they were facing an unnatural entity, not a normal deer. The deer stood straight like a human, looking at the grandfather and grandson for a few seconds, then turned and walked into a nearby stream. Strangely, it didn't react like a deer, no struggling or panic. The deer simply drowned in the stream, like a creature that had completely lost its survival instinct. This scene caused extreme panic in both the grandfather and grandson. They didn't think, just hastily left the area immediately. They ran straight home, but even upon arrival, they couldn't shake the creepy feeling, secreto. They dared not tell anyone, fearing people would think they made up the story. However, the haunting memory couldn't fade, and this story was widely shared on Reddit, where members began linking this bizarre event to the Skinwalker, a creature capable of transforming into animals. After the story spread, a warning was issued. Skinwalkers are not just legends, but phenomena that can appear any time, especially in desolate places where humans least expect them. These creatures might not only hide in the dark, but also possess the ability to manipulate and control animal behavior to carry out their dark plans. This story made everyone ponder whether Skinwalkers truly exist, and if they could be watching us even when we don't realize it. On a night in November 1994, at a remote military base in Utah, a group of soldiers, David, John, and Mark, were assigned patrol duty near the Skinwalker Ranch. This was an isolated area, surrounded by sparse forests, hills, mountains, and desolate regions. Everyone knew this place was famous for supernatural phenomena, but no one truly believed the folklore. Until one dark night changed everything. Throughout the patrol, everything was normal, until they neared the ranch area where the local residents' livestock grazed. The cows, sheep, and horses were the main livelihood of the Sherman family, the owners of this ranch. One strange thing was, while patrolling across the open field, David suddenly felt something was wrong. The animals here seemed scared. They wouldn't leave their pens. Their eyes were fixed in one direction, but they didn't move at all. As the soldiers approached the livestock pens, they noticed a cow lying motionless, its body bearing strange cuts. There was no blood around, but body parts had vanished grotesquely. David, though bewildered, continued to investigate. A sudden gust of wind whistled past, startling the whole group. They heard rustling in the nearby bushes. The group halted, readying their weapons. Just then, from the darkness, a giant black figure emerged. It was a wolf. But it wasn't like ordinary wolves. This wolf stood upright on its hind legs, more than twice the height of a normal wolf, and its eyes glowed brightly like two embers. It suddenly lunged towards the soldiers. David quickly shouted and started firing his weapon. He fired 3 shots consecutively, but the wolf didn't fall. Blood splattered, but the creature only retreated slightly, then continued advancing towards them at terrifying speed. The shots couldn't take it down, but made it retreat straight into the darkness. When the soldiers pursued, they found absolutely no trace of the wolf. No footprints left on the ground, no smell of blood, just a silent and cold space. The next morning, when they returned to search the area where the wolf disappeared, they discovered a strange circle on the ground, as if some object had landed and left marks. In the center of the circle were sticky pieces of flesh from the killed livestock. This wasn't the first time the Sherman family had encountered such strange phenomena. Previously, their livestock had also disappeared suddenly, or were killed bizarrely, their body parts precisely removed. These traces couldn't be explained by natural phenomena or wild animals. And now, the soldiers were also facing something strange and inexplicable. Returning to the base, David couldn't sleep. The wolf's glowing eyes still haunted him. Perhaps not only skinwalkers, but other supernatural entities were hiding in this area, waiting to intrude and wreak havoc. Everything seemed far from over. On June 13th, 1987, James's family drove from Salt Lake City, Utah, to a small remote house in the outskirts of Nevada, about 50 miles east of Reno. The surrounding landscape was desolate, only arid desert and distant mountains. The late afternoon light cast a reddish-purple hue, creating an atmosphere both beautiful and menacing. This was a visit to James's grandmother, that he would never forget. James' grandmother, Nala, was a Navajo woman living alone in that simple house. Although she wasn't religious, she had a strong belief in supernatural phenomena. One strange thing James remembered about her was that she always kept the curtains closed at night and would only quietly peer outside, her eyes clouded, as if waiting for something. Every time James asked her about this, she would only reply with a sentence he couldn't understand. "The Yenaldlushi is watching me." One afternoon that day, James and his younger brother, Charlie, then only 6 years old, were playing in the yard in front of their grandmother's house when she suddenly rushed out from inside. Her face was deathly pale, as if she had just seen a monster. "Get back! Get back now!" she screamed, grabbing Charlie tightly and pulling them inside the house. And in that instant, they saw a large black shadow blocking the yard gate. That dog, as large as a Great Dane but jet black like the night, stood there, its bright yellow eyes staring intently at them, making it impossible to look away. Those eyes were not those of a normal animal. It looked at their grandmother as if it already knew she would be its prey. Though the sun had long set, the dog's eyes still shone brightly, casting a strange light that seemed to envelop their surroundings in gloom, as if darkness was lurking. A heavy breath emanated from the dog. Then suddenly it turned and ran into the darkness. But the strange thing was, it didn't run like a normal animal. It moved so fast they only saw a shadow flash by, unable to recognize it. When the dog disappeared into the night, the air felt compressed, and a chilling sensation enveloped them. James' grandmother stood still, her eyes wide open, muttering words they couldn't understand. "The Yenaldlushi has found me," she said, her voice full of despair and fear. At that moment, James didn't understand why she was so terrified, but he clearly felt the danger emanating from that black shadow. A few days later, James's family received news that his grandmother had decided to move. There was no clear explanation, just a strange silence. Everyone in James's family was confused, and James couldn't forget the eyes of that black dog. Though they didn't say it, James knew that the thing his grandmother called Yenaldlushi was not a normal creature. It was a dark spirit, a supernatural being she had lived with for many years. A few weeks later, when James' family visited her at her new home in another area, she no longer spoke of the Yenaldlushi. But James knew well, something had followed her for all those years, and perhaps it was still lurking somewhere in the darkness, waiting for a chance to return. The night of August 21st, 1910, in the Michigan woods. This is what Alex recounted. "I still remember that night vividly. The night fear would haunt me for the rest of my life. It was the night of August 21st, 1910, when my cousins and I were staying at my grandmother's old house in the middle of rural Michigan. The house was deep in the woods, where no artificial light could penetrate the dense canopy, and the cold evening winds only made the atmosphere gloomier. Grandmother was the only one living in that house where everything was old and silent. That desolate space always filled me with an inexplicable anxiety. That night, we gathered around the campfire, telling ghost stories and playing Truth or Dare. The four of us, including me, Alex, 15, Daniel, 14, Ben, 13, and the youngest cousin, Charlie, 10, dared each other to do all sorts of things, until Daniel suddenly dared me and Ben to walk through the dark woods. At that time, I didn't think much of it. Being the oldest, I always thought I was strong, not easily scared. But then, I realized the chill of the forest had enveloped everything. We didn't bring a lantern, as it wasn't completely dark yet. but the night air seeped into our skin and gloom began to cover everywhere. We walked along narrow paths, branches reaching out as if wanting to grab us. Each step seemed heavier, and that quiet space didn't feel peaceful, but like the silence of something waiting. After about 5 minutes, we could no longer see the fire behind us. Everything around was dark and frighteningly silent. And then, like a shock, we saw a giant figure right in the middle of the path. A creature, not human nor beast. It had the body of a dog, but the head of a human. Its eyes glowed like headlights, staring intently at us. Everything seemed to stop. I couldn't move. Both Ben and I stood frozen, our legs stiff as if devoid of strength. It crouched, its long arms hanging down, just a few inches from the ground. Each step it took was heavy, the sound echoing as if from within the earth, the air feeling suffocating. Both Ben and I were paralyzed by fear. The creature looked straight at us, its eyes full of hostility, as if seeking to kill us. And then it darted away with unimaginable speed, swift as the wind. We only managed to scream desperately before turning and running hastily back towards the fire, not daring to look back. When we returned, the horrific scene hadn't left us. We saw the corpses of Grandmother's 2 dogs, Jax and Daisy, scattered in the yard, brutally torn apart. I can't describe the feeling of seeing their bodies. The claw marks on their bodies were horrifying, as if they were ripped apart by something incredibly powerful. I felt a chill from the depths of my soul. Not a word was spoken, only heavy breathing and hurried footsteps running into the house. We couldn't sleep, but everything remained silent. I tried to ignore the fear, but couldn't. A while later, I woke up, and when I opened my eyes, I saw all my cousins sitting silently, wordless, motionless. I looked into their eyes, and I saw extreme fear in their gazes. All 4 said nothing, but all were looking towards the window. Then one of them, Charlie, the youngest cousin, gently nodded towards the window. I turned to look, and then I saw a face pressed against the glass pane. That face was not human, but something chaotic. Its eyes were empty, wide open, looking down at me with eyes full of hostility and disgust. I let out a scream. But as soon as my scream rang out, the face vanished, as if it had never existed. Grandmother immediately called the police after I recounted everything, but they found nothing. The police searched the forest, but everything was the same. No tracks, no evidence. We never went back there at night again. A few months later, our family moved away, leaving behind the old house and the mysterious forest. But to this day, I still can't forget that face. Those eyes glowing like headlights, and the strange creature in the woods. Surely something terrible is hiding in the darkness, a creature we cannot explain, cannot comprehend. And I know that if I went back there, I would find something waiting for us. Something not human nor animal, but it's still there, lurking in the darkness, and I will never forget what I saw. All the stories above were collected and searched for by me on the internet. I don't know if they are true or not, and if skinwalkers really exist. If you liked these stories, please comment the number 9 to let me know, and subscribe to my channel Apex Fears. Have a good day.